Municipal Voice is proud to present a special edition with our Executive Director and CEO, Joe DeLong, who will be interviewing guest Vincent Mauro, Chair of the New Haven Democratic Committee and former State Senate Chief of Staff. They talk about Mauro's long legacy in local politics and his hand in shaping the political landscape on a statewide basis, as well as the final 30 days of session. Join us for this no-holds-barred discussion. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. And now, over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Matt. So as most of you know, Connecticut native David Letterman now has a show on Netflix that's titled, My Next Guest Needs No Introduction. Well, here on this podcast, let me just say that in political circles, in the behind-the-scenes world, our next guest probably needs no introduction. Maybe not everybody in the state knows him, but certainly anybody who wants to rise to any level of political power, anybody who wants to drive their issues through the General Assembly, those who just have general interest behind the scenes in state government know our next guest very well. He has served decades as a top staffer within the Senate Democrat Caucus, rising to the position of the Chief of Staff within the Senate Democrat Caucus for several years, and now still maintains his position, which I know he's had for over a decade, as the chair of the Democrat Party in New Haven. And anyone who follows Connecticut politics knows that all those who wish to rise to power, all those who wish to hold higher office, those democratic elections and frankly the general elections, they run through New Haven. So today we have the privilege of having somebody who is a kingmaker with us. And I just want to introduce him. Vincent Mauro, thank you for coming on today. We appreciate you spending some time with us.
That was quite the introduction. I'm really glad I brought you that Dunkin' Donuts for you.
Yeah,
I think it would have been a little bit, the introduction. The Dunkin' Donuts helped the introduction.
Yeah, is that it? It probably. Well, first of all, I owed it to you. Yeah. Number one, I owed it to you because the last time that Vin and I sat across the table from each other to have a conversation, I spilled a whiskey all over him.
You did.
I did. And so he wouldn't meet with me in this close of proximity now for 10 years.
Right, but there's no bottle here.
Now I've got a bottle of water.
Big bottle of water.
He was eyeballing the fact that it didn't have a cap on it. I thought about getting us a couple bourbons just to make up for that, but I figured it was a little early.
A little bit early for it.
So we would hold off on that. But
we could always go down to the Owl Shop later if you want.
That's right. So, we're going to talk about that, why we met that face-to-face over a decade ago is because we were off to a rocky start.
Yeah.
And I think that was an attempt to try to smooth some things over from that rocky start. But it also, it tells you how well it went when I spilled whiskey all over you. But, we gave a little bit of an introduction, Van, about your positions, both with the Democratic Caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, as well as here in New Haven. But before we dig too deeply, I'd just like to take some time. Everybody in the political circles knows who you are, but do they really know who you are? Like let's talk about, you have an interesting career path that you've carved out. I know that you have had, like many people, but you've certainly had some tragedies early in your life and all those types of things. Could you take a little time just to have a conversation about how you got to where you are today, the path that got you there? What makes Vincent Mauro tick?
All right. Yeah, I think it all starts in New Haven to me, right? I mean, I was born into, as you well know, a political family. But my father died young. I was 14. My sister was 10, So I sort of, as crazy as it sounds, my father's friends sort of became my friends and mentors and,
Sure.
People like Marty Looney and Jack Keys. And, there's a long list of those folks that were like contemporaries of my father's that sort of like, well, come on, let's talk. And it's sort of, the center focus has always been just New Haven for me. Mm-hmm. I think it's always been a unique place. And, even through college and law school, people were like, where are you moving to? I'm like, people never asked me because they were like, he's never leaving New Haven.
Yeah.
And I just didn't. And it's been fascinating and to watch the city go from, when I was in high school in the, mid 90s. I mean, New Haven was a dangerous place. Early 90s, New Haven was a rough place. You had 30 murders, a couple of those years, kids that you played baseball with or basketball with, they were shot and killed. I mean, it was definitely a different place. And you've seen, like, over the last 20, 30 years now, how New Haven has just sort of changed in what people perceive it as, what people want to invest in. It's just been a remarkable, journey just being part of New Haven. Listen, the other things that motivate me, I don't know. I mean, I think, you're going to get the Red Sox, I got, and a few other things. And, Giants had a good draft. I mean, these are, a couple quick things.
Now, can you go toe-to-toe with Marty Looney on sports trivia or not even close?
No,
I mean, it's remarkable.
Marty is I mean, his Heisman Trophy shtick has been working for him for a long time.
Absolutely.
But no, it's
still impressive.
Listen, I mean, I still, it's always nice when someone asks them who the 82 Heisman Trophy with. I'm like, come on, everyone knows that was Herschel Walker. That's the one everyone knows. But it is. I've had the benefit of really good mentors, both politically mentors, just as moral compasses that have helped sort of guide me even when I start to stray, bring me back. But that sort of community, sort of feeling of people taking care of you. I mean, I'd like to just credit that. I mean, that's really what that was my whole life. So,
and a lawyer by trade, right?
Yeah, I mean, could have been at law school and literally never left. I mean, literally never left New Haven. I tell people all the time, I still get lost in West Haven.
Yeah.
I mean, Jones Hill Road, I still get lost there.
Do you ever consider hanging a shingle or doing that type of law, or you've always been tied into the public policy government side of the work?
I think it's always been public policy and the politics and the intermingling of. I think one of the points that you've always tried to make at CCM, quite frankly, is there's no body of government that affects someone's daily life more than what happens at the state capitol. Right? I mean, that is the place in a state like Connecticut that they affect your daily life far more than anything that happens in Washington, far more than anything that even happens locally. And it's almost like the forgotten branch of government in so many ways. People know who their city council is or know who their alder is. You ask some people who their representative is, and they'll say Rosa. It's no, who's your state rep? Oh, Rosa.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or who's your senator? Well, it's Dick Blumenthal. No, who's your state senator? But nothing affects someone's daily life like what happens in that building. Right? Those are real decisions that. And the effect is immediate in a lot of ways. With some things that happen in Washington, take forever. Well, maybe not in this administration at times, but
today,
right. I mean, a bit different today, but
they change every minute.
Exactly,
now,
but right. I mean, I think part of that is under normal circumstances. I'll say that, what happens in Hartford is such makes such a profound effect on your daily life. Everything from what kind of garbage bag you could have, or what kind of when you go to the store, what bag they give you to, the change in the cannabis laws. I mean, those are statewide issues that affect people's daily life far more than people actually understand.
Well, you certainly get no argument from me there. I've talked about from the property tax standpoint how many times people think of their property tax as being something that's just set and guided and governed locally. Okay. But your property taxes are heavily influenced by what happens at Hartford at the State House.
Absolutely.
And so that's a really important connection for us. So we're down to about approximately, we'll say, a month left of session.
Yep.
You spent a lot of time behind the scenes. I know that for all intents and purposes, and I understand this because when I was in office and I was in a powerful position, there's a shelf life when you leave, and you're still within that shelf life. You still have a lot of sway, and people still come to you, and whether you want people to know that or not, you still have your finger on the pulse of what goes on to some degree.
It's nice that I get to. I just get to give my opinion now,
and then not worry about.
I'm not responsible for the product or anything. I'm allowed to just give my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good place.
It's a better place to be.
So tell people, like, what don't they know in this final month? What goes on, particularly, in the Democratic caucus, which is by far the most powerful caucus of the General Assembly, that's going to guide and direct the most policy. They also, for a variety of reasons, some of which upset me, but some of which I understand, are in many ways more secluded than some of the other caucuses in terms of, outside access to them. A lot of that's because they have so many responsibilities. What goes on these last 30 days behind the scenes, and how do people have an impact on what goes on those last 30 days? How do they access those leaders in a way to try to help sway them, or to give them what their guidance or their opinion, or what they think is most important for their communities? Because they have a long session and a shorter session. But the session is really these last 30 days.
Yeah.
I mean, none of us want to admit that at the beginning.
Yeah.
But the session is really these last 30 days, and it really comes down to the last couple of weeks. So can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I think part of it is in people who don't actually understand the system, like, well, why are they getting stuff? Why are they passing bills at midnight? Why are they doing these kind of things?
Sure.
And why do they wait till the last minute? And it's almost like a government 101 course for a quick second. Like, you have so many concepts that emerge in a long session like this, right? Most of them don't have a chance, but the process was important to move the ball a little bit. Like incremental process. Got a bill raised, and this time I got a public hearing, and maybe I got a vote out of committee, and they keep working those concepts. I think what you see for a lot of the committees now is. And this is what makes Connecticut pretty unique in a way is the Democrats and Republicans work extremely well on 90% of the bills.
Yeah.
Most bills are bipartisan, pass in support. And then there's the ones that clearly are ideological differences and sometimes personality differences that take over. But what's happening now is all these committees are sort of like really putting the final touches on concepts and bills that they have been working on. In some cases, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, or in some cases just, this one session. So a lot of those committees are going through that process of, working through the nuts and bolts of the language and making sure people signed off on it, and making sure, their ranking member, on the House and the Senate, the Republicans are like, that's something like, here, I'll be good with this bill if that, if you just include that one piece, great. I don't have a problem with that piece. And they're putting those buckets together, for final passages in a lot of ways. Now, the reason why people say, well, why does it take so long? Is like, well, if it's just like every other negotiation you ever had in your life,
Sure.
Right? You don't negotiate early. You wait till the best deal at the end. You get generally the best deal at the end.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why some of this stuff just takes so long, is because everyone's waiting to the last possible second to get the best deal possible. So that's for most of these committees, that's what's going on right now. Listen, there's some major issues that, will take more time to flush out. There'll be more time, there'll be more, bigger groups that are going to have to meet to sort of solve some of these bigger problems. That will dominate most of the senior staff and most of the leadership. And then you have an entire other track, which is the one thing you've always had to worry about, which is the budget. So for a short session, you don't really have to worry about the budget part. But this year, so you have all these major bills that are going on. You got energy stuff. You have, artificial intelligence. You have all these different major topics going on in the committee process. And then on a parallel track, you have the entire budget process that's going to take place. And I think, which is why that building sort of runs, nonstop. Because once again, you have to sort of be in the room to make those deals. And some of these folks have to be in all the rooms. So you can't, like, why can't we have this meeting now? Well, because that chief staff's got to be in the budget meeting, right? So you can't have that meeting. So there's only so many people they could be in so many different places as well. So I think that's what's really going on now. And I think they're going to, like, you'll start to see, both chambers say, okay, here's how we're going to lay out the next couple weeks. We'll shoot to have a budget done by this date. We'll shoot to have our bonding bill done here. We'll shoot to have this, right? And that could all go awry at some point, but they start to slot some of their major bills in to give some sort of, organization to the last, listen, even a long session, you're generally in 20 times into the chamber, into the chambers, right? And, so you're probably down to, 15, 16 more times. And that's going, including Fridays and Saturdays and stuff like that. But, listen, it's also like when you have a long session for some of these legislators, listen, if you have if one of their kids is in high school, graduating, it's, like people want to go and, they want to leave at 4:00 in the afternoon because someone's got a baseball game or a softball game or a track meet, right? They're still also humans and parents. So it's like, well, why didn't you stay later today to do the work? Well, because you know what? It's important for them to actually, spend some time with
because they're part-time citizen legislators and they have
and they have jobs. Have families. Yeah. So part of it is, well, why do they wait to the end? It's like, well, because life is also, people take life into consideration. So, but that's sort of the behind the scenes as, they sort of like map out the last month of session here, how to take the remaining time and be the most effective with the time you have left.
Yeah. Obviously at CCM, we do a lot of things, but we are at our heart, an advocacy, a lobbying and advocacy group. We have had both good relationships and fragile relationships. Is that a nice way to put it? Fragile. You can use whatever terminology you want, but I think that there are certain legislators that really lean into and enjoy working with us and enjoy us as a resource. And I think there are certain legislators that are just like, here comes CCM, close the door. So I don't have to deal with them or I don't have to scream in their face for something they did or said.
Sure.
Give me your perception from the inside of how we approach things as an advocacy group to get messages out there for our towns and cities, where you may have some appreciation for the message and where you don't. I think that's important because somebody in your position, obviously, again, a lot of influence, a lot of political insider knowledge. And, so I want to talk about policy, but I also just want to talk about that perception and that relationship a little bit between CCM and the General Assembly, in particular that caucus.
Yeah, listen, I think it's complicated at best, right? I mean, I think CCM I don't think anyone argues with the mission. Sometimes the messenger has been a problem. Mm-hmm. I will say that. But I think when you make a phone call about a bill or funding, I think it's listened to. But if the same phone call gets made by a mayor or first selectman that, it just means that much more.
Of course.
Yeah. Right? So I think, and it's part of your struggle as well, trying to engage your mayors and first selectmen to be more visible at the Capitol, to be more, aggressive in what they need. So I think no one argues.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Right. I mean, that's a hard thing to, and, listen, I mean, if you're asking a mayor to go up there for 3 days, it's like, or she's got, I got to run a city, right? I can't spend 3 days there. That's why I have you. And I think part of that is, it makes it harder, right? Because they want to hear from their mayors and first selectmen, right? I mean, they move legislators faster than a lobbyist would move a legislator.
I think part of that also is, which I'm sure you can recognize, there are things that we can say or do or push back on as a lobbyist organization that are very difficult for our mayors to say or do or push back in the same way because they're pushing back on people within their own party who are running on the same ticket as them, who they're trying to all be politically supportive of each other. Yeah. So sometimes it can be a little bit like you CCM have to say it because it has to be said, but it's a very difficult position for us to be in to say it.
Well, right, then you get blamed for it.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I get every other week I get a direct deposit that goes in. And
that's exactly. That's your job.
So that's
right?
okay.
Yeah.
I'm not whining about that. I whine about things. We can get into some of the whining, but I won't whine about that. I mean, that is our job to do that. But I think it's also important that we're always hearing ways that we can be more effective, more part of the process, because we really do, at our core, want to be a valuable resource and partners in governing, so people at least understand how, as you said, those decisions that are made in Hartford impact our communities in the most direct way. I think sometimes we're in a better position to really articulate how those things impact our communities.
Listen, I've said this, even politically, mayors and first selectmen, when they are running for office, a mayor or first selectman knows far more on nuts and bolts of how to run something than most people do, right? Mm-hmm. I used to joke, like John DeStefano, when he was mayor of New Haven, would know how many miles to the gallon a city plow would get, right? I mean, like there's a level of detail when you're a mayor or first selectman that you have to have in order to be effective. They do make better arguments in terms of how to connect things. I think one of the biggest issues, obviously, is the funding issue, right? I mean, and to your point, the property tax. When you have to pay $12,000 a year, just to have your house and car in a city like New Haven, I'm just picking a random number. People start to wonder, like, what am I getting for that, and why am I paying that $12,000 a year, just to have a house or a car, in the East Shore neighborhood, which you can see from, by the way, lovely office.
Oh, yes. This is your city behind us, right? This is your city.
So I do think that's, people start to question. I think you're starting to hear a lot more people starting to talk about the property tax as, the people realizing maybe the income tax isn't the biggest burden in the state, but it's rather, obviously, the property tax.
So let me talk about that some and talk about, first of all, I don't like, in my position, I don't like the term state aid, because I think the term state aid has a connotation to it. Like it's aid is like I'm helping you out. And I think that there are responsibilities and partnerships within those responsibilities, because municipalities are entities of the state, so we are all the same umbrella. But I want to talk about priorities a little bit, but I want to make sure that I get a chance as I outline this priority that I slip in a little bit of my opinion, because I don't want to look like I'm picking on a certain class, because that's not my intent at all. My intent is to outline a priority. Under this current administration, so over the last 6 years, we have seen public employee salaries outpace inflation by 8%. Now, the private sector comparison of that, for people who don't know, is private sector wages have lagged inflation by about 2%. Now, let me just say this. I have no problem with public sector employee wages outpacing inflation by 8%. I don't. I sincerely don't, because everybody who works a job and does it well doesn't want to just stay level with inflation. As your career goes, you want to be able to get a raise. You want to be recognized for good work. Our state workers are no different. Okay, so level setting that. However, from a priority standpoint, during that same period of time, state funding to K through 12 education has lagged inflation by $407 million a year. The thing that I find concerning about that is if you lag inflation by $407 million a year in K through 12 at a state level, what you are essentially doing is either telling a municipality to raise the property tax to make up the difference, or to cut it out of the kids. But either way, you're using the property tax, not a state tax, a local tax. You're using the property tax to subsidize the state employee wages in a way that I find to be unsustainable over time. That's probably my biggest give and take with the General Assembly. Not that I have a problem with the state employees getting their pay raises, but I have a problem with them outpacing inflation while the funding for our kids is lagging inflation by such a large number. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're picking on one specific part
I'm picking on the largest budget. Part of municipal budgets, though.
Right,
the largest part.
And one of the smallest parts of the state budget. And so I think that's part of, it makes for a better story when you talk about how much money people make. But I would say this, if we're going to have that kind of conversation, then the municipalities that have seen a decrease in tuition or enrollment, are they giving money back?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I think we could have those conversations, but
Right,
again,
but I mean, but it's fair, right? I mean,
what I'm talking about is when I say lags inflation, I'm talking about lags inflation per pupil. So yes, we had declining enrollments, but that's lags inflation per pupil.
Right,
So,
but what I'm saying is, we could splice the numbers and the narrative all we want. You have towns that have seen a decrease in enrollment, yet are still receiving the same amount of money, if not more, than when they had their peak enrollment. So that delta right there is huge. Let's take some of that money and put it into the places where they're actually kids. I guarantee the numbers change on that number.
I think the first thing that you would find in that, and you have to dig in, you have to have leadership to dig in, no question about it. But the first thing you will find is you have a base of the funding formula that the state put in place. We call it the ECS formula.
Yep.
The base of the funding formula has not changed since 2013. So even though in those towns have had some declining enrollment in kids, they've also had major cost increases in the kids that are still there because of those inflationary adjustments. So my thing is, if you're going to fund per kid, should we at least not be funding per kid at least the level of matching inflation? So we're not driving the services down or forcing property taxes to go up.
Listen, I mean, you could have those kind of conversations. I think those are good conversations to have. But the hold harmlesses and when you're using, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because you brought up education per se. Like those hold harmlesses, well, you don't have enough kids. Where's the money going? Right? I mean, I think part of this is people are losing. I think what you see, and I'll reframe it and take it out of this one particular issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what you see in government, and I think you see it from the federal level all the way through now, is I think citizens there's a credibility gap, right?
Fair, yes,
right.
absolutely.
I think it's a credibility gap, right? When you tell somebody we're going to do this for you, do that for you, and you do it over years and years, and that's Democrat or Republican,
and the problem persists.
And the problem persists.
I don't want to cut you off. Right. We do have to go to a break. But let's pick this up right after the break. I think it's a great conversation. I'm excited to have it with you.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM.
Okay, welcome back. Before we went into the break, I think you were deep in making a very important point about the credibility issue of the appropriate use of taxpayer dollars, delivering the right product to taxpayers. We're talking about public education and that partnership between the state and municipal governments. I just wanted to give it back to you to let you finish your thought.
Yeah, no, I think I think part of it is and you get this now all the way through the federal government, especially now. People are losing faith in government in a lot of ways. So this reestablishing government as a place of that people have faith in it, right? And reestablishing that credibility. We could solve 99% of the problems once people sort of buy into if we actually agree something's going to happen, and they could get it, and it'll actually get fixed. I think people are starting to get into this. It doesn't matter, There's a shrug. There's a who cares, right? They care when they have to pay their taxes. They care when they're paying their income taxes. They pay right? They care when they're pumping gas, right? I mean, like these are places where people, they're captive audiences. But I think reestablishing credibility, and once again, it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's an overall government issue. Once people get back to that, and we could reestablish, and I don't know how long it's going to take, right? Because I think the other problem we have with this is sort of the media coverage to it, right? Like there's very few media outlets that people absolutely trust. I mean, one of the lasting legacies of either the Trump administration or one or two is people question truth, right? It's fake news. Like, I mean, did you ever hear of anybody say fake news before this? No, but I think part of that's a real issue, right? When people don't know what the truth is, or they question what the truth is, how does that then affect how government can actually perform? Because you could say yes and you could say no, and they don't believe either one of them, but one of them is right. And even if both of them say yes, even both sides of the party say yes to something, there's still a group that says, yeah, I don't trust either one.
I don't trust either one.
I don't trust either one of you. So I think we could talk about specific issues, but there's an overall theme to like how to reestablish truth and credibility. And I don't think there's a simple answer to that either. I think that's part of the problem that we're going to have to deal with.
I think part of the problem too is, and I'm sure you'll agree, is because of the changing platforms of social media and the way people get their news. We don't have a lot of traditional media anymore covering state house issues, covering town halls, covering the ones who do it in the state. I think do a very good job.
Absolutely,
but they're overpressured, overstressed, and so they
can only be in a certain amount of places at some amount of time.
So what they end up doing a lot of times is chasing the soundbite.
And that's exactly right.
Governor said this is how I report it. CCM said this is how I report it. Nobody's looking at it and saying, hey, wait a minute, what you just said, does that make any sense? Or drilling deeper. And part of that is simply because of the volume. I mean, when I got here just 10 years ago, the Capitol Press Room was a pretty hopping place still. You go there now and it's a ghost town. You might have 2 or 3 people in there at any given time if you're lucky. So I think that's a real concern.
The consolidation of newspapers in the state, and get some key retirements. I mean, listen, when I got to the Capitol, and I'm sure, there was nobody that walked the halls of those buildings that struck more fear in anybody than John Lender.
Yeah.
John Lender's been retired now for, a bunch of years. But John was one of those reporters that kept people very honest and kept politicians honest. But to your point, they do chase the soundbite. So once again, even if you have the Democrats and Republicans both saying the sky is blue, there's a segment of this population now that says, I don't believe either one of
any of them.
So how do you then connect to them to say, this is a better way to fund children, to lower property taxes, when they're questioning what color the sky is?
Well, see, I think here's part of the challenge with our organization along those same lines, because that trust issue, it crosses all of us, right?
Yeah.
One of the challenges we have is that level of trust, I think, with the state and the General Assembly to hold the commitments that it says it's going to hold. So we talked about public education, obviously significantly lagging inflation per pupil. So that's a direct shift out of really the income tax and the sales tax. It's not a savings, it's a direct shift from the income tax and the sales tax and shifting it into the property tax. But then you have areas like Pilot. And Pilot is somewhat unique to Connecticut. However, Connecticut's property structure is very unique. Our urban communities, as you're well aware, here in New Haven, very small geographically, so very little taxable property.
Absolutely.
And so what the state has done statutorily to help address that issue is they've created this program called Pilot that basically says, you don't have a lot of property to tax. So if we're going to take property off of the tax rolls, we're going to supplement or make a payment to cover those properties that are taken off the tax rolls. Now, the state in the formula only covers what they would be taxed 45%. It's not a lot. Colleges and hospitals that are tax exempt, it's a little higher. It's like 77%. So that arrangement, while not perfect, and very unique because of our geographical challenges, also creates a level of animosity because it's never been fully funded ever. So even today, Pilot is underfunded by the state, but about $400 million a year. So you look at a city like New Haven, and you say you have, from a property tax standpoint, you have a very small property tax base to tax. We're going to reduce the proportional share of education funding provided by the state. We're not going to fully fund Pilot. How does a city like New Haven make up the difference without taxing its residents to death or cutting services to the point that New Haven, which none of us want to see, goes back to a city that has the significant struggles that it had, many years ago.
See, I knew you were going to go into like,
I knew you would be prepared too.
I knew you were going to go into the whiny association of mayors. So since 2017, I pulled this up. State funding for towns has increased $1.6 billion, or 41% since 17. I don't remember you ever saying thank you.
Well, I think we've said thank you.
I don't remember any thank yous.
I think we've said thank you for a lot of things, but I think you still have to grapple with the fact that when pilot is not funded, when public ed is allowed to go down that rabbit hole of being shifted. And by the way, let me say this. I want to make a separate argument here that goes in a whole different direction. Maybe you agree or maybe you disagree with it. But what I'm talking about is priorities when I compare one priority against another. We now have these fiscal guardrails, right? Yes. Okay. So
are you in favor of those or not? Let me just ask this question.
I am. Yeah. So I think it's a complex answer because when they were put into place.
That's a politician's answer.
Well, no, it's an actual answer because here's where I differ completely from the governor.
Okay.
You were there.
Yes.
When they were put in.
I was stuck in that room in 2017.
I was there.
Trust me when I tell you.
What a long budget passed on Halloween. It was a horrible year, really rough.
Yeah. You should have been in the room.
You
should have been in the room to see how bad it was.
And they were done in the room. Is it fair to say they were done in the room in the 11th hour?
Oh, it wasn't the 11th hour. It was months and months and months. So this didn't happen in an hour. Trust me.
But at the very, very end of it, so there was my belief. Yours may be different. My belief was the governor refers to these things as sacrosanct.
Yes.
When they were put into place, I never thought that anybody had the opinion that they were sacrosanct. They were a starting point that were going to have to be worked and modified and adjusted for the times.
You agree with Marty Looney on something.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And by the way, our organization does too. So do I think that we should take the fiscal guardrails and get rid of them? No.
Okay.
Do I think that they absolutely need to be modified and brought up to the current times and talked about, not as something that's sacrosanct, but as something that has to move and evolve? No question about it. No
Absolutely.
Question about that. So, and now I've totally lost my train of thought on the other question. But I think that's a very, very important type of thing. But we're talking about priorities. Yep. So here's where I was going with that in the guardrails. Everybody, whether I say it's aid to distressed municipalities, or if I'm a nonprofit and says it's a nonprofit, whoever it is, everybody wants a carve out to go around the guardrails.
Yeah.
Okay. We can't do that. And I recognize that.
Right.
However, public education funding is the only funding out of all of those things that is actually defined and protected in Connecticut's Constitution, particularly with regards to equity.
Yep.
So my thing is, should public education funds be exempt from the guardrails simply because the Constitution speaks directly to a regard to equity? And if you use the guardrails as a reason to hold down education funding, you are therefore driving significant inequities in places like New Haven, Bridgeport, Hartford, Waterbury. So I think we need to have not just a guardrail conversation, but a conversation of whether or not the constitutional requirements for public education should fall, or should the Constitution be being overridden by statutory guardrails. I think that's an important conversation to have that nobody's having.
Listen, I don't disagree with that. But I mean, I think when you talk about the guardrails and modernizing them, absolutely. But to your point, as soon as you want to carve out this, there's a line a mile long,
of course,
that everyone else wants the same carve out. The inequities in some of the major cities on education, we could solve that thing right now. Open schools. Let some of the kids in New Haven go to, I'm looking east, so I'll say Branford or Guilford. How about that? Why do the kids in New Haven just have to stay in New Haven schools? Right? I mean, you want to talk about inequities, let's say Connecticut has open schools. Open school choices for anyone. No matter what town you live in, if you want to go to a different district, go ahead. No, they have people in those towns who are like, you're using a bad address. We're kicking you out of school.
Wouldn't it be simpler just to set up those schools as districts under the county borders as opposed to the local borders? I mean,
listen, we could do a whole thing on consolidating 169 cities and towns and have a real conversation. I think that.
But every state. I mean, there's 49 municipal leagues. Hawaii only has one municipalities, so they don't have a league. There's 49 municipal leagues because every state has municipalities. But we are incredibly unique that our school system is structured under our municipalities. That is an anomaly here.
Absolutely.
And drives a lot of those challenges as well.
I don't think you'd have a problem from like some of the cities saying, sure, let's regionalize schools. Like, let's make it more inclusive. Let's make it, better for everybody.
Sure. And let's talk about some of the craziness where we've done that for a minute. I mean, you look at over at like the Amity school system.
Right.
Now, when I first came here, I moved to Bethany. First town I lived in Connecticut. Beautiful town. New Haven County, beautiful town, great people, love Bethany, love the time I spent there. My oldest daughter started kindergarten in Bethany. As an outsider, which, complete outsider, I had to be literally set down and explained to me how 3 towns had 4 boards of education.
Yes.
And how 3 towns had 4 superintendents of schools.
Right.
And how 3 towns had 4 curriculum directors. And it was because there was this consolidation made of the middle schools and the high schools while still allowing the communities to keep their individual community schools. And in the end, I looked at that as a parent. I'm not even talking about CCM guy. Now, I just looked at it as a parent moving here saying, are my tax dollars going to the classroom with my kid? Are they going to my kid's teacher? Or are they going into massive layers of administration that are totally unnecessary? But nobody leads on that issue at the State House. We tried to lean into it a few years ago, but this administration, and this is where I get frustrated, and I'll make an allegation I shouldn't make, will upset you because you're the Democratic chair. But I look at Washington, D.C., and I see a president, now I'm going to upset all my Republican friends, I see a president that wants to almost defund public education at the federal level and push it all down to the states.
Yep.
I feel like we have a governor that, since he's been in office, has worked to defund public education at the state level and push it all down to the towns and cities. And my thing is, their policies on public ed are no different. The pressure that it's putting into the property tax, which, by the way, is disproportionately hurting senior citizens. Absolutely. It's raising the rent on single moms. It's doing all of those things, and it's creating greater inequities. And yet we'll have this battle between a Democrat governor and a Republican president. But when it comes to public ed, it's really the same approach. And how long can we continue to do that before our local policymakers, as you say, so much is impacted by Hartford, step in and say, we've had enough of this. Like, we can't keep taxing people to death and driving at the local level and driving these inequities.
Listen, I've been waiting for someone, for a municipal leader to say, listen, why don't we start combining services? Right. I mean, and we got to start that conversation now. And I do believe that 169 cities and towns in a state the size of a postage stamp doesn't work. Right? It just doesn't work. Right. West Haven's been in receivership.
Not when they're all delivering their services and there are no county-based structured regional services.
They have to do it on their own. But if we're going to take a quick crystal ball look at this, as artificial intelligence is going to be a complete game changer in the business world and in the private sector, it will too as well be in municipal government, right? I mean, like, artificial intelligence is coming for every walk of life, right? So we have to start having those conversations now about how to share services. But you can't do anything right now because a lot of these are locked into long-term, union contracts. Well, what is going to happen when AI does most administrative work? It's going to do it in the private sector first. Eventually, it'll go into the public sector. So much of this stuff is going to change, but those are conversations that, in earnest, need to begin now, so that we're not behind the curve soon, right? When you have a city like New Haven and West Haven, so now I'm looking west here. See, I was looking east before, now I'm looking west here. Right? Like, when the one public works cleans one side of the street and leaves the other side of the street dirty, because that's the city lines, right? Part of this is
happens with fire departments,
right?
By the way, some of which are actually protected statutorily, right, which is even crazier. But
right, I mean, we need to get to a point where services are going to get shared, and maybe borderlines get erased, right? And they start consolidating cities and towns, maybe not under, officially, because, God forbid you eliminate, the football rivalries. But part of this is, what's Connecticut going to look like in the next 4, 5, 10, 15 years? I don't know if 169 cities and towns can maintain its current levels without significantly combining services. And that's not even taking into consideration, the AI world that is just advancing. I had this conversation the other day, like artificial intelligence is an existential threat to the legal business. I mean, when you think about the hourly rate, how do you justify spending, 6 hours, associate hours and 3 hours and 3 hours, right? I mean, sure. It's an existential threat to the legal business. So as opposed to including everything else, how's that going to affect a municipal government when all of a sudden AI is going to be able to send every invoice and collect all the money? It's going to be able to do 1,000 other things that currently employees are doing right now. Mm-hmm. Are those employees going to be protected? Is artificial intelligence going to replace them? It's not going to happen overnight.
In the collective bargaining state, it's going to happen slower than most places. By the way, I support collective bargaining.
Right, but that's my point. Saying but people are going to fight to hold on to those jobs. But these are what I'm saying. Yeah. That's why these conversations almost need to be happening somewhere soon, because there needs to be some sort of, because when it happens, we're going to be caught flat-footed.
But here's the other side to that. Let me preface it by saying I agree with everything you just said, 100%. And that's on the controlling the expense side. But I don't want to, because there's a misnomer out there. There's a misnomer out there that we already are so inefficient that we spend these massive amounts more on public ed than anybody else. That's not true. In the region, which we're an expensive region, so let's not compare Connecticut's education system to Mississippi. There's absolutely no comparison. Yankee Institute does that all the time, drives me insane. Right. If you're going to compare, you have to compare in the region. In the region, New York, New Jersey, Vermont, all spend more than we do per pupil, all of them. Massachusetts is very, very close. But the difference is, in an urban center like Connecticut, Massachusetts at the state level spends $14,000 per pupil on those lower funded districts, and the rest goes to the property tax. In Connecticut, in New Haven, the state spends $10,000 per pupil. Yeah. So the costs are very comparable, but the percentage that the state is funding is significant. It's 40% more in Massachusetts to a district like New Haven than what Connecticut is doing. And so I don't want to get hung up in this rabbit hole that it's all about us not consolidating. It's all about us. That's really important. And controlling cost is really important because I want to see those dollars go into the classroom. That's where they belong. So that's a really important part of the conversation. But that doesn't lend to the fact of being honest about the fact that we're not spending out of line compared to our other states. The money just may not be delivering well. You know what I mean? But the spending actually shouldn't be cut because the spending is not all that high anyways, which a lot of people think that it is, and it's not.
Yeah, I think part of it is a perception problem.
Yeah,
I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's a perception problem. As soon as someone's announced, so a school has to announce layoffs, what's the first thing that happens? We're going to lay off sport, we're going to cut the sports program, the arts program.
Yeah. And the boards of ed do that to protect their budgets.
Exactly.
It's a smart move.
Never the third assistant principal somewhere else, or to your point, the superintendent that doesn't have a school, right?
Yeah.
So there is I think a perception problem that needs to also be overcome, so that when people, I don't think if you ask the legislator, if I'm going to give you $1 and I give you, like you could give it to a school, if you said to them 90 cents on that dollar is actually going in the classroom, I don't think any of them say no. Problem is you can't prove that 90 cents on that dollar is actually going in the classroom.
I would agree that that's a structural issue that needs to be addressed. But until you fix the structure, you have to be willing to fund the structure.
It's incumbent upon the boards of eds in these towns to prove, right, because of the perception issue, that if you give me $1, 90 cents is going into that teacher, into that classroom. It's not going into all this other stuff. I don't think people will ever argue with you.
And until they prove that, does that mean that we continue to diminish the quality of education?
No, I don't think it is, but I think it makes your argument harder.
I would agree.
It makes your argument harder.
We only have a few minutes left, and I really wanted to shift to one other thing, which is the great work that you do here in New Haven. I would love to have you back on. I'd love to do this forever. I don't know if you ever come back. I haven't spilled anything on you today.
But you didn't offer me a real drink either. Yeah, but it's only 10 o'clock in the morning.
We'll film the next one in the evening somewhere, and we'll have a real drink. Let's do that. So, But I want to talk a little bit about, again, to me, people say, well, you don't get it, you're an outsider. I've been here for 10 years, but I accept the fact that I'm an outsider. I wasn't born and raised here. I'm not native to Connecticut. One of the things that I see, and I think it's sacrosanct here, is the fact that our elections are not what I would consider in other parts of the country to be what I call the open elections. Where I would run, you'd have the Democratic Party would typically say, we've got 6 good people running, and we support all 6 of them in the primary, and whoever wins, we're all going to come together and unite, and we're going to back our nominee in the fall. That's how it's done in some other parts of the country. Here, to get on the ballot is much more controlled by the local parties. And so, to some degree, you take the voter in at least the first wave, you take the voter out of the equation, and you put somewhat power brokers in. So if I am not endorsed, if I'm not loved by Vinnie Mauro, my only way to get on the ballot may be to go out and petition and put a bunch of work in and get signatures and all of that. Talk to me about that in turn. I think you do great work. So I'm asking, it's a hard question, but talk to me about that in terms of the voice of the people. Does our political election process here, being so party controlled, take away the voice of the people in terms of selecting their nominees?
I think part of it is, the primary system, right? I mean, to get on the ballot as, for a statewide office, you need 15%, of any convention, which in a lot of ways is not very difficult.
Yeah,
at a statewide convention, it's less than 400 people, right? To qualify you for a ballot. On the local levels, it's 1% of the registered Democrats in the area, in the place. I mean, so in a city like New Haven, it's it's a couple thousand signatures. I mean, I don't know if ballot is, and so I don't think I understand your question, but I don't think it's ballot access, because if you're a candidate and you're motivated, you could get on the ballot, right? Ballot access isn't the issue. I think it's the lack of. I mean, and I will say this, and my Democratic friends will have a hard time with this. I believe at some point we need to go to open primaries, right? I do believe at some point, and I think the Republican primary, I think what you see in a lot of this is people are registering as independents or unaffiliated. So there's this giant, people who don't then have a say in the election, in the primary elections, where the major candidates are chosen. I think in some states they have open primaries, which I think engages a lot more people in that process. I do believe at some point we're going to have to go to open primaries. I think as both parties sort of pull closer to the polls, the opposite sides.
I appreciate. I'm sorry, I'm getting the hook. I think we're up on time.
Right.
But I appreciate your time so much. I appreciate you coming and spending the morning with us, and I'd love to do more of this.
All right,
man. Thank you, sir.
All right.
The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Joe Thornton is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.